Have you ever thought of living abroad? What are the difficulties and the rewards of moving to another country? We'll find out today as Reza and I are joined by Emilia, Nick and their daughter Lucia. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig y Nick y Emilia y Lucia.
Hello and welcome, especially if you're a new listener. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And together with over 50 years teaching English, we're going to help you improve your grammar, your vocabulary and your pronunciation and take all of it to the next level. Nick, Emilia, Lucia, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks for having us.
Craig, what about the bit we always do about Craig and I have over 50 years of experience between us. How many years of experience now between the four of us?
Nick, how long have you been teaching English?
12 years, I think now, yeah. Last count.
62. Emilia?
Officially since 2007, but I did quite a few privates before.
But before that as well, so about 20 years or something? About 20 years? Yeah, about 80 years. So about 80 years of teaching experience.
So together with 80 years of teaching experience, this episode is really going to help you. First, we have a message from Patreon supporter Jesus from Cabanyal, Valencia. Reza, would you like to read it?
Yes, Jesus from Cabanyal, hello. He wrote this email. My work is the realization of painting sets for theatre, opera, dance, etc. Since I sometimes have to deal with foreign professionals, I have to use English with them. I wanted to suggest to you, if possible, to create a podcast dedicated to the world of theatre and especially to the stage vocabulary. Thanks again, and I encourage you to continue making these podcasts so useful and enjoyable to listen.
Well, thank you very much, Jesus, for your email. And we have done an episode on the theatre with theatre vocabulary. Jesus, if you go to inglespodcast.com/181, you'll hear an episode all about the theatre. And if there is something we did not speak about that you're interested in specifically, please write back and let us know. So, Nick, Emilia, Lucia, where did you grow up and where's your accent from?
Well, I'm from Bristol, so I grew up there, and so my accent is from there, although I think it's kind of evened out or lost some of its regional aspects since teaching English, basically.
For listeners who don't know, where in the UK is Bristol located?
So Bristol is in the southwest of England. It's 2 hours or so, maybe perhaps 2.5 from London to the west, kind of just south of Wales. So from certain places, you can actually see Wales from the city.
And Emilia, what about you?
Okay, so my father is from Valencia, my mother is from Birmingham, and I was born in Nottingham, Midlands. And my accent, I'd say, has also become fairly neutralised over the years, though it's pretty malleable. It kind of depends who I'm around. So if I'm with Nick and his family, it gets a bit West Country, Bristolian. If I'm with my grandmother, I get a bit of a Midlands twang. If I'm with my cousins from the southeast, it gets a bit Londony. So it's a bit neutral, I'd say.
I think we're all different people depending on who we're with.
Yeah, exactly.
My accent changes completely when I'm with my family. It goes very London, very Cockney. And yours, Reza, you've said goes very Belfast when you're in Belfast.
I go back, yeah.
And Lucia, where were you born?
Spain.
And how often do you go to the UK to visit?
To England, he means.
To England.
Almost every summer or every Christmas.
So do you have family living there? Who from your family lives in England?
Grandad.
Granddad? Only Granddad?
And who lives in London?
No, Wolfie.
Wolfie the cat. And how about relatives, humans?
Uncle Squirrel.
Yeah, your Uncle Squirrel.
Okay. And who's your oldest family member who lives in England?
Nanny Joan.
And who is she?
My great grandma.
Your great grandmother. Good.
Do you like going to England, Lulu?
Yeah.
Why?
Why what?
Why do you like going to England? It's cold.
'Cause it snows.
All the time.
No. Just sometimes in winter. And I find it a bit funny in there because if my friends went there, they said, "Oh, in summer it's rainy."
They would say that, wouldn't they?
So, Nick, Emilia, you're both English teachers and you've moved countries.
Yes, we have.
You've moved countries. How many times?
One time.
Well, me and Mummy, we've moved. Well, I've been in Italy. I taught in Italy, and Mummy came there.
And you also taught in China.
We have
Yeah.
both lived in China.
That was before you were born, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
How long were you in China for?
10 months, I think it was. wasn't
Yeah. About 10 months. Yeah.
it? That was back in
Interesting experience.
2011. I think it would have
it
been.
was, yeah.
Around then.
Which part of China was it?
Guangzhou, southeast.
Well, it's Guangdong province, so it was actually near Zhongshan, wasn't it? Because Guangzhou was the capital, which is to the north of us. So we were in a smaller town called Shaolan, but by Chinese standards, small meant hundreds of thousands of people.
What was it like when you arrived there? Because we'd like to give the listeners some advice on moving countries if they go to live in a different country to work or to study. Do you remember anything that shocked you or anything that was difficult to get used to when you first arrived in Italy or in China?
Italy, I would say the staring, because it was quite a small town in Italy. How about you, Nick?
Yeah, no, the same thing. It's just people quite happily and culturally are able to maintain eye contact for a lot longer before anyone gets nervous about things. So the feeling that you're being stared at, coming from an English perspective, where a lot of the time people will do anything to avoid looking each other in the eye, was quite overwhelming at first, until you realise that that was a cultural thing.
Did you find it aggressive in the beginning?
I think so. Yeah. It seemed that people were trying to stare you out, and to make you back down or move away. It's just more culturally accepted to do that.
And people would also order food and drinks on your behalf. Like my students took me out for dinner once and they wanted me to try this and wanted me to try that. And I tried to go for a chicken curry and they were like, no, mamma mia, no, sei in Italia. And it got a little bit patronising, but that they meant well. So
Yeah, at least they always bought
they
you
did pay
food and
for it.
drink.
They did pay. Yeah. What about your teaching experience in China?
Well, at the school or in the street, it was staring again, actually, as you noticed that. But that was just because, well, that was a different type of thing. It's just because I guess they didn't see Westerners that much, even for a big city. And so it was a genuine surprise. We'd turn a corner and people would jump out of their skin sometimes.
Yeah.
I had one shop assistant when I was buying a camera and I walked into their shop and she was chewing gum and she freaked out so much to see me that she ended up almost choking on it.
They didn't see Westerners very, very often. I taught at a primary school and the kids used to follow me around everywhere, even at break time, even to the toilet. They found me so fascinating. There was also... There's also another thing that they used to do is they'd make very obvious statements. They'd bump into a Chinese neighbour in the lift and they'd say, "You're not from here." Well, no, clearly we're not from around here. Just little things like that were
"You're
quite comical.
tall."
You're tall. Or with you it was the curly hair.
Yeah, it was my curly hair. They
And something
weren't
else.
used to that.
You're left-handed.
Oh, that I was left-handed. That was really unusual for them.
Is that strange in China to be left-handed?
Yeah, because I think that most people are taught to write with the right hand, at least in the school where I was.
You said about the hair. Agada, who was on the podcast a while back, she was the one who did an episode about vegetarianism and veganism. She was in China when she was a young girl, and people felt it was perfectly okay to grab her hair because she has very curly hair. Complete strangers in the street come up, "Oh, curly hair, I'll have a handful of that."
Yeah.
Oh, tell us about your hair then.
I had school children come up and I'd be sat working at my desk in the staff room and I'd just suddenly be standing there sort of looking at what I was doing. But really, I think they came just to touch the hair on my arms. They'd be looking at my computer screen alongside me with a kind of dazed smile and then suddenly feel this hand come over and start running along my arm.
Lulu, do you remember anything about Mum and Dad's time in China?
People kept on spitting.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's true.
People did
spit quite a lot. Yeah.
Oh,
They had to put signs up in some places to say no spitting.
We're talking about indoor spitting.
It was in the street, actually. No, just in public places like parks and the zoo. I think I saw something like that. And it said kind of no spitting. It was translated into English as well for foreign visitors, just in case. But no spitting. Offenders will be prosecuted.
Tell us in general about different places you've been, things that you remember that you really like and dislike.
I know. England. People are a bit fat there.
You think English people are fat?
Yeah.
Do you think it's because of the chocolate?
Sometimes they're about this fat. Well, even though you can't see, though it is that fat. So the ones that listen can't see.
They can't see. Craig asked, why do you think English people are generally fatter than Spanish people?
Do you think it's because of the chocolate?
No.
What were you saying with the things that you liked about England? Because there's lots of things you like.
Green. It's all green.
What do you mean by green? Or green sky?
No. Green. All the plants were green. The trees were green. Everything was green.
You mean a lot of trees and plants and
Yeah.
things?
Grass everywhere. Is there anything you don't like about Spain?
Daddy, how long have you lived in Spain? For about 10 years now. What do you not like about living in Spain?
No, I think just workers' rights, that's something that you notice, that the absence of good contracts and, generally the employers have more rights. It's more geared towards the employer.
I know people in Spanish companies are expected to work more hours than is written in their contract. So they do extra hours and they don't get paid for it. That doesn't necessarily happen so often in the UK.
Yeah, I guess I'm referring to that generally. Amy, why don't you talk about your case?
Okay. So what don't I like about living in Spain? Fewer career opportunities. I mean, the fact that we're both English teachers is convenient, but also options are fairly limited. And the heat in the summer in Valencia is pretty insufferable, actually. So it's convenient that we've got family in the UK as well. Yeah.
So you tend to go back to the UK in
We
summer?
do, yeah, at least a couple of weeks. Yeah. So many people to visit.
Are there any other countries you'd consider emigrating to?
Oh, yeah, we keep on talking about Malaysia because we spent some time travelling there after China. And what did we like about Malaysia? Do you remember things that we thought would be great for family life?
It was quite accessible as a place. It's very different and natural settings and lots of animals, and a kid would love it there, we were thinking. And people were very friendly, lovely food. Just generally, we thought a great place to take Lucia for a year if we could find work there. And there seemed to be quite a few jobs available for English teaching. So it's somewhere that we could both work and Lucia could enjoy spending a year there. That's what we were thinking about.
Is it a real possibility, do you think it might happen?
So we talked about it, maybe perhaps before she goes to secondary school. So it would mean renting out our house for a year, I guess, and getting a sabbatical in our jobs. And so we were thinking, perhaps a year. And because we've been there already, we kind of know what the place is like. So it's not as big a leap as it was in China, which was a big culture shock, really.
Well, I was thinking about culture when you said that, because people who are listening might be thinking of changing countries, and one possible problem will be the difference in culture. So if you were going to move to a country like Malaysia, what things would you think about culturally to prepare for before you left?
Well, one thing was that in lots of places they don't serve alcohol. There's a big Muslim population there, and so in lots of places there isn't alcohol or for sale. It's prohibited.
Would that be a problem? No booze?
I mean, I think for
slight one,
your
yes.
average Brit going abroad, that might be a bit tricky.
Yes. And it's funny that you're asking that question about cultural issues in Malaysia, because obviously Nick and I went a few years ago and it was very idyllic. We were there for about a month and it seemed like such a lovely open place to go to, but we were tourists. And a few years later, I met this teacher who said she'd lived in Kuala Lumpur and taught for a year, and she found people very, very racist. And that might be something that we didn't become aware of at the time because we were treated so well. But she was black, and she said that she found a lot of racial discrimination in Malaysia.
But don't you think there's racial discrimination in every country when immigrants go to live there?
Yeah, in every country, to a degree.
Have you ever felt it here as a British person living in Spain? Have you ever felt discriminated against?
If anything, perhaps more positively than negatively sometimes. I mean, you get the odd person calling you a geary, but people often see it as an advantage. If anything, they try to milk the opportunity to practice English if they can, don't you
There's
think?
probably kind of a set of assumptions like that you won't understand certain aspects of culture, or that you feel slightly demeaned by people having to dumb down instructions or things like that. But generally speaking, I think that...
What does dumb down mean?
Well, just talk to you as if you're about 5 years old. Say the same thing again, but just, as if they were talking to their kid.
To oversimplify things.
To oversimplify, yeah. I guess that's what I was trying to say. But mostly I think it's positive. It's more positive discrimination, whether it's because people, would like to get to know you to practice their English. That can happen, and we've known that happen. But sort of generally overall, because English is seen as an advantage over here, then you're viewed in a positive light.
I think I might have been cheated a couple of times because tradesmen, electricians, carpenters, etc., plumbers may look at me and think, oh, he's a foreigner, he's possibly got more money. Obviously not true, but we'll charge him extra or we won't do such a good job. Has that been your experience?
We had that in China all the time, taxi drivers.
That's true. Yeah, there seemed to be a foreigner tax that was actually... In some countries, there is a foreigner tax. Like in Thailand, they have different rates. For the same product or service, there are kind of 4 different prices, depending on where you're from, if you've settled there, if you speak the language. I might be wrong on the last point about whether you speak the language, but that might enable you to go up a rank and pay a bit less if you do. But yeah, in China, they made us pay more.
And sometimes we'd get into arguments because I used to think, let it go. We're arguing over 20p, but you'd say, no, it's the principle of it. They're ripping us off.
Because it would be double the price. Just because you weren't from there. But if you were living and working there and earning a local wage, then why should you pay more?
That's quite interesting. They had no qualms about asking you exactly how much money you made every month. Like this baker in the shop, how much money do you make? You're an English teacher. And I sort of told her. And it sounded to her like less than she was expecting. And she almost seemed relieved that I wasn't making that much money. Like, it's all right.
Reza, have you ever felt discriminated against as a British person in Spain?
I would just repeat what you've just said, that you might be treated a bit like an idiot, like you're not going to understand. But I've never really felt that anybody's tried to charge me more money or anything like that. Maybe they did right back at the start when I first arrived here because I couldn't speak the language. But I think once you get to know the language a bit, people change their behavior. They're more likely not to rip you off, not to charge you more than they should, because they go, hold on, he knows what I'm talking about here, But until you know the language, I think there's more chance of it. So possibly I was overcharged once or twice years ago, but only I think it's because they thought, he doesn't understand.
I think you had an interesting case in reverse, actually. When you were in England and you were speaking to your sister in Spanish.
Yes, indeed, that did actually happen, to come to think of it. Me and my sister, we grew up in Spain, so we speak Spanish to each other in there. We're both bilingual. And we were at a bus stop somewhere in England, I won't name, and this older gentleman came up to us and said, what are you doing in this country? And I said, well, I'm British. No, you're not. You're speaking that foreign language. You're Polish. Go back to Poland. So I experienced a little bit of Europhobia, and I was absolutely horrified. And it happened again in that same town, so I'm not going to go back there anytime soon.
And it was in the Midlands in the north of England?
Yes, it was in the Midlands, yes, I'll only name.
Where they voted for Brexit?
Yes, including my grandmother, who, bless her, is 91 and I guess doesn't know any better, but...
You've just reminded me of something racist that happened to a friend of mine, which made me laugh many years ago. It's quite funny. There's a funny side to it. A friend of mine from Spain who I'd met when I first came over, and I stayed in Cáceres, in Extremadura. She was studying English. She wanted to improve her English. And she came over to Belfast. Not because of me, by the way. In fact, she ended up marrying a very good friend of mine from Belfast. But that's another story. She came over, and there we were walking down the street in Belfast about 15 years ago. And we were speaking Spanish. And my Spanish is extremely bad at that time. Nobody who knows anything about languages would have thought for a second that I was Spanish or anything else. But this is the thing. We were speaking Spanish, right? And this person walked past and said, and I'm gonna use an offensive word to some people. This person said, bloody chinks. Chinks. A derogatory term for Chinese people. We were speaking Spanish. We don't look Chinese. And I told her, and we just started laughing. We thought it was hilarious.
So you mentioned going to or thinking of possibly changing countries with Thea and spending maybe a year in a country like Malaysia. What do you think of the expression, the grass looks greener on the other side of the fence, or the grass is always greener on the other side?
So wherever you go, you're always going to be dissatisfied. It's in human nature. You'll always have something to complain about. What do you think?
Well, it always does, because you always look into the future. And yeah, it's the nature of things, isn't it? You kind of always want something new and something exciting that's not now, essentially. So that's always going to be the case. But the implication of it is that you'll leave what's behind and not come back to it. So you risk losing what you've got now. But I think in this case, that wouldn't really happen, because we'd only go for a year. And we know we're coming back to our house that we're buying here, so
you'd be going for the experience rather than change your lifestyle.
It is going there specifically to spend a year and knowing it's not going to continue on from there. I guess. But you have to allow things to unfold as well, don't you? It could continue.
You're quite settled, Reza. I mean, you've been in Spain for a long time, and you've recently, regular listeners know that you've recently done up your flat, so you're very settled now. But
After been talking about it for 20 years.
Before that happened, did you think of changing countries again?
Yeah, in fact, I did go back to Belfast, where I come from, for a while. I came to Valencia way back in 1998. And in 2010, I think it was, I got a bit fed up with some things. And also a job opportunity presented itself, which sounded really good. It was at Queen's University. On paper, it was going to be a good job, but it turned out not to be such a good job. And I went back partly because of that, but partly because I was a bit fed up with some things about Valencia. And I was there for a few years. I thought, you know what? I'm actually going to go back to Valencia. It's really not bad at all.
And you don't regret coming back?
No.
That's the thing, I guess, as well. So sometimes it's good to go with the grass is always greener, because then you realise what you don't want and you appreciate what you had before. So in your case, you came back.
But I remembered why I went back to Belfast thinking the grass is greener. Yeah, because it bloody rains all the time. Which is why I wanted to come back to Valencia. Like, yeah, it's green because it's horrible weather here.
Well, Lulu had a point earlier about it being greener. It was always greener in England.
That's true. So on that point of the grass being greener, I think it's important to remember the things we should be thankful for that we have at the moment, and not necessarily look on the other side of the fence. Now, we're recording this podcast on December the 1st, and last Thursday was Thanksgiving Day in the US, so why don't we say one thing that we're really thankful for at the moment?
I'm thankful for the house that we bought and the life that we're creating out of living in it, if that makes any sense. Like, I just love where I live at the moment. I love our house, and I love the time that we spend in it as a family. So I'm thankful for my house and my family.
And your recording studio.
And my recording studio, especially that. That was in the back of my mind. But as I'm sat next to my wife, I thought I ought to front that first.
Yeah, it's funny. The small things in life that you take for granted. The house, our health, our daughter, and you and I. Actually, that's what I'm grateful for.
I am thankful for the loyal support of all the listeners of this podcast, because it would be nothing without them. That is what I'm most thankful for.
And I'm thankful for my lovely Spanish wife, who's prepared a beautiful lunch for us that we're going to eat now. But before we go, Lucia's hungry. Lucia, do you want to tell us what you would like for Christmas? Do you have a Christmas list? Because if Santa's listening...
New trainers that have lights on the bottom.
Trainers with lights on the bottom. Wow. What else?
A sweetie making machine. And a wedding dress.
A wedding dress? You're getting married?
For you?
No,
a flower girl dress because she was flower girl at her auntie's wedding.
A yo-yo and 2 surprise.
Well, I hope that Santa gets your request, and I hope Santa's listening to this and that you get what you want for Christmas. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on the podcast. Nick, Emilia, Lucia and Reza and myself. Let's say goodbye.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So before we go, we'd like to ask you to practice your English. Why don't you send us a message on SpeakPipe? You can do that by going to speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe/Ingles podcast, and leave us a message. Remember, you only have a maximum of 90 seconds on that application. Reza, how can people reach us by email?
If you want to write to us, you could send us an email to Craig. He's at craig@inglespodcast.com, or me, belfastreza@gmail.com.
And just before we go, Nick, you create your own music. So why don't you tell the listeners where they can go to listen to your music?
Okay, well, I've uploaded quite a few DJ drum and bass and techno sets to my Mixcloud account. So if anyone wants to check those out, that would be great. It's basically my nickname, which is Nicky D, which is NICKEEDEE. So if you just look for that, Nicky D, on Mixcloud, you'll find a couple of sets and just have a listen. And if you like it, press that button.
And we will put a link in the show notes to Nick's Nicky D account so you can hear his music. Remember, the show notes can be found at inglespodcast.com/291. Just before we go, thank you to all our wonderful patrons who are supporting the show, who are receiving transcriptions of the podcast every month. If you would like to join our patrons, please go to patreon.com. That's patreon/Ingles podcast. And we don't have room or time to list all of our supporters, but Reza, who are the latest Patreon supporters who have joined us this month?
Yes, thanks to these guys who've just recently signed up: Ana Cuevas, Assumpta Ferran, Alba, Laura Sandoval, Gemma Curto, Damien MCC, Inés Cadenas, Dani Palacios, Rafa B. Aguado, and Ana Esther Luengo Herrero.
Thank you very, very much. And on next week's episode, we'll be speaking about New Year vocabulary. So please join us then. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And goodbye from Lucia. See you next week. The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later. And also by Nick. You can listen to more of Nick's music on his Mixcloud account, Nicky D, NICKEEDEE. And here's some more of Nick's music to play us out of the episode.